Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast, helping people improve their executive function skills and reach their goals. Brought to you by Untapped Learning. Today we're sitting down with Lauren Levey, a college student who has firsthand experience with the challenges of perfectionism and anxiety. Growing up in a high-achieving environment, Lauren faced consistent pressure to excel academically and athletically. She shares her journey of navigating this landscape, the toll it took on her mental and physical health, and how she found balance and structure to help manage her anxiety. Whether you're a student, parent, or educator, Lauren's story offers powerful lessons on how to manage perfectionism and prioritize your well-being. Let's begin. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The reason I wanted to have you on is because you have such amazing insights for anxiety, but this perfectionism thing. So I never grew up with perfectionism. It was actually the opposite. But I know a lot of people do.
I would say that a lot of that started for me because I went to a high school where everybody was that overachieving kid. That was the norm. We had every group of people, our star football players, everyone was that overachieving all AP type student. And I had no choice but to fall into that, because that was the environment around me.
Yeah, so take me back. Talk to me about this high school scene.
Yeah, so I went to high school in a suburb of Chicago where we have a really unique mix of incredible diversity and incredible wealth. And that creates a really unique dynamic where everybody is achieving for everything and everybody just wants like a slice of the success. So you end up in an environment where every single kid is taking a schedule of all APs and all honors, and an environment where getting a B was failing. And that sort of notion, which creates a really anxious and perfectionist environment.
Yeah, I can't even imagine growing up in that. And so even if, because I know you guys, a lot of you had amazing parents, but even when you do, sometimes you probably get the message that your worth is your grade in a class or whatever you're achieving at the time.
Yeah, I grew up thinking that I wasn't super smart. I did not take all AP classes because it was too much for me. I took maybe one or two AP classes, which now that I'm almost out of college, I know is actually still high achieving.
Yeah.
But I was surrounded by people who were constantly trying to achieve more, that I was pushing myself over my limits to achieve more. And I was pushing myself so far that I was spending late nights studying and not engaging in the rest of my life because all I cared about was getting straight A's.
So take me through a high school schedule. What does it look like from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed in one of these high achieving communities?
Also, it was an environment where everybody was overly involved in activities. So I would wake up at 6 a.m. and I would be at school for an early morning club meeting by 7 or an early morning basketball practice by 7 a.m. And school would start at 8. I would be in school all day like a normal high schooler, but lunchtime was not spent hanging out with my friends. Lunchtime was spent sitting at a table with my friends while we all worked on homework. And after school, I would go to another club or to basketball practice until, 6 or 7. And then I would come home and, if I was lucky, eat dinner with my family, or I would eat dinner while I worked on homework and while I studied for AP exams. For me, it was meeting with lots and lots of tutors to keep up with everyone. I had tutors multiple nights a week trying to keep up with the people around me.
Just what we know about learning, unless you work really hard, which you obviously were, but unless you scale back a little bit, it doesn't seem like you retain any of this information. Were you actually learning in this environment?
It wasn't until I took a step back and removed myself from some of these honors classes. I removed myself from an honors science class freshman year, and I took a step back for myself because I realized that it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't until then that I started retaining information. When I was in this environment where I was constantly pushing myself, I was rereading textbooks, but none of it was sticking in my mind. I wasn't doing that active studying. I was just trying to keep up, and I wasn't.
And where did you get this from? Because I don't envision your parents being like, you have to get into Harvard.
No. And that was what eventually took me down, was my parents were like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to keep pushing yourself to keep up with everyone. It was the friends and people that I was surrounded by that were constantly getting better grades than me, and I was wanting to keep up with them because that was how you stayed quote unquote popular in school, and that was how you maintained your friend groups in this environment, was being just as smart as the people that were around you. And it wasn't that I wasn't smart, it was that I wasn't doing things for how I learned. I was trying to do things based off of other people, not based off of who I was.
That's such a good point because we all fall into that trap, whether you are a perfectionist or me, who was not that. I was kind of the opposite, but I just didn't learn the same way as other people. So I love that you caught on to that. I mean, you talk about being popular. Did you even have time for friends in this type of environment?
This type of environment made it really hard to maintain a life outside of school. Everything we did came back to school. So hanging out with friends would be studying for tests. And maybe on the weekends we would go to, the high school football game, or we would go to, I don't know, brunch or something together to spend time. But my weekends were spent with homework. And as an athlete too, my weekends were spent with practice, with trainings and games and stuff like that. So I was with people, but I was never fully disconnected from school. School was always still there.
I'm assuming, just based on knowing how you're wired and what you're describing, that the same pressures were there, whether it was athletics or music or something else. Like you had to be just as high achieving in those things, correct?
Yeah, we were a very athletic and a very academic school. So it wasn't uncommon for people at this school to be a 3-sport varsity athlete and take all APs. That was not me. I realized, thankfully, that I couldn't do that, but I did play basketball most of high school. And I was in other clubs and other organizations that took up a lot of my weekends and a lot of my evenings and afternoons and before and after school as well.
Were your parents constantly trying to pull you off this like achievement treadmill type thing? Or what did that look like at home?
My parents were always there to support me no matter what. My parents are the ones that would sit with me and be like, you don't have to do all of this. They taught me that a B is still a passing grade. And at another school, a B would be celebrated. And my parents were the ones that brought me down from this like overachieving environment because they just wanted me to be healthy and happy. And I was still achieving things. I was still getting, over a 3.0 GPA. I just wasn't doing it the same way as everyone else. Like I was getting really good grades in my regular classes eventually because that's what was best for me and that's what was best for my brain. And they helped me realize that I didn't need to be in all AP classes and I didn't need to be competing with all of my friends to be the smartest person because I was smart in my own ways.
Yeah, it's such a never-ending treadmill. Just because you do well in this one class and this one test, well, it's on to the next, right? Of course, we want our kids to do amazing things, but this had to affect your health in some way, right?
Eventually, I was diagnosed with anxiety and some other things, but when I was in high school, I had a really severe concussion from playing basketball and pushing myself really hard. And I prolonged the effects of that because I wasn't resting, because I wanted to keep going. This was sophomore year. That was really the event that took me down from the overachieving because it just wasn't sustainable. I wasn't keeping myself healthy. And then I was getting sick because I was constantly doing things. And I just wasn't taking care of myself.
Yeah. Well, and did you see this a lot in your school as well?
Yeah. Attendance was everything. People would come to school sick because they didn't want to miss out, and classes were so rigorous that they didn't want to, lose anything. And eventually I was like, I need to take care of myself. And I got super, super sick my senior year of high school and missed a ton of school, even when it was online, and focused really hard to come back from that. But that really put things into perspective that your health is just as important as your academics.
Did you see a lot of people melting down in this type of environment? I would picture it would go a couple ways. One, you tend to just figure it out, right? This perfectionist lifestyle. The other one would be you keep it up for as long as you can and you kind of melt down. But the other one, I think, what a lot of people would just say, I'm not playing that game and almost underachieve. Is that a fair grouping, or how did that look?
I would say that's probably a fair grouping. I think we had 100% high school graduations and 99% went to college. It was more of like a public school college prep environment where there were a group of people that, overachieved and went on to IBs. And then there was another group of people that started to calm down and went to your quote unquote average university. And then there were people that said, this is not for me and I'm not going to do it. And it's not to say that this whole high school was overachieving. It was just very common.
What was your original goal with all of this? What did you view as the end game when you were in this highly perfectionist driven state?
My end game eventually became, I want to be a teacher. But that was still hard when the schools that I was applying to as my reach schools were the schools my friends were applying to as their safety schools. And an average school from my high school was going to that Michigan or Northwestern, because we were in Chicago. Like it was going to those sort of like mini Ivy Leagues, those schools that are seen as the quote unquote good schools.
Got it. And so you took a step back sophomore year. Talk me through that process.
It was hard. It was hard to feel like I wasn't capable of achieving as much as other people. And it took me a while to come to the conclusion that it's not that I wasn't capable of achieving as much as other people. It was that I learned differently and I needed different things. I didn't do well in the classes that were super, super fast paced because I needed more time to process information. And it wasn't that I wasn't capable of being in one of those classes. I was, just not all of them. So it became really a pick and choose game where I knew, okay, I'm really good at, English type classes. I can bump up to an honors or an AP in that one, but social studies didn't come naturally to me. So I'm going to stay in a regular version of that class. And that was really hard. I sat down with my parents to go over my schedule and talk about what I was capable and what I wanted to push myself to do more in and what I needed to be like, okay, this is the balance that I need.
You're so well spoken about it now, right? And you understand and you see the big picture now.
Yeah.
If we would have talked to sophomore in high school Lauren, I'm guessing it did not sound like this at all.
No, it was a lot of, and like I said, I wasn't diagnosed with anxiety until I was in college. So I didn't know why I was feeling like this. I didn't know why I was struggling constantly and why tests would break me down because I hadn't been evaluated. I hadn't learned about that stuff. I didn't really know what anxiety was. So it was a lot of tears. There were a lot of nights of me sitting with my mom crying over grades and crying because I didn't understand things. And all of my friends were studying together and I couldn't keep up with them. Eventually it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this myself. And I'm going to try and study different ways. And I'm going to sit down with my tutors and talk about what works for me.
Yes. And that's well said. And so if someone's listening, maybe who thinks they may have this anxiety due to this perfectionism, or a parent is listening, what are the signs that you started showing that were kind of the red flags here?
I was overly focused on tests. Every time a test came up, I would freak out. I wouldn't sleep the night before. I would sit during the test, and every time people would turn the page, I would be like, why are people ahead of me? What am I not getting that they're getting? And then I would get so in my head that I wouldn't be able to recall the information because I was so focused on everything around me. And I was overly like planning everything because I was so anxious about forgetting something or falling behind on something that I was doing everything multiple times.
Talked about being emotional. What did that look like?
It was a lot of me breaking down over homework. I would sit at the kitchen table, and I have vivid memories of me sitting at the kitchen table and my brother or my mom or my dad trying to help me with work. And I was just so anxious that I wasn't understanding it. And I was so frustrated that I would break down and I would cry and I would eventually have panic attacks over things because I was overworking myself to try and fit into a mold that I wasn't fitting into and to fit into the study tactics that wasn't working for me.
Like sit still, be quiet, just remember everything you read, right?
Yeah.
Like stuff we know that a very few number of people actually have. How's sleep for you?
I would go to bed late and constantly be tired. And then I would have trouble falling asleep at night because I would be thinking every night I would lay in bed and I would go through everything in my head that was going to come up. And I would try and like recall information and try and like somehow study in my sleep. Like I was so focused, especially when I had tests, I was thinking about everything that could possibly be on the test, every type of question that my teacher could possibly ask me. And I would get myself really worked up at night that I wouldn't fall asleep until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I would, be up at 6 a.m. like a high schooler.
And just the amount of stress your body's under for that long of time. I mean, it's no wonder. It's always amazing to me that people can make it to sophomore year in a state like this. Like that shows resiliency in itself when, most people can't live under that kind of stress for that long.
And it was really my junior year math teacher really unlocked something brand new in me. I dropped down from the honors math classes. I wasn't keeping up. And I needed something that was a slower pace because I needed more time to consume the math information. And I had a teacher who came from teaching in the Chicago public schools, which is like notorious for teachers having to teach in a really specific way. And she came from Chicago public schools to more affluent Chicago suburbs. And she taught math in a way that I had never had a teacher teach. She would give us multiple different strategies and she would teach the same problem 3 different ways. And eventually one of those ways like clicked in everyone's brain. And we were having this environment where everybody in the class was getting it because she was spending the time to teach to different types of learners because that's what she had learned to do as a CPS teacher because she had so many different types of kids. Whereas a lot of the teachers that I had In the past, we're teaching to one kid. This was the first time I had a teacher teach to me as a learner. The skills that she taught me, I took with me for the rest of high school. And that's what really, really unlocked that I just learned differently. And that's fine. She changed everything for me. It's the highest math grade I've ever gotten, and it was a pre-calculus class.
The problem was it's highly perfectionistic, and then we had the meltdown. I guess one more quick thing on that. From the outside, it's like, Lauren wants to become a teacher. Why do we need a 4.5 GPA? There's so many good teaching universities. We don't need that. But when you're in it, you just don't see this stuff, right?
And that was one of the things that I finally came to the conclusion was I'm not going to go to Yale to become a teacher. And I can be just as successful as a teacher. And I mean, I still went to an amazing school. I go to CU Boulder. And I could have been just as an amazing teacher if I went to community college. And that was a lesson that finally set in for me.
In hearing you talk, there's two things that come to mind. One is, do your actions match your ambitions? I know so many people we see at Untapped, they are trying to get that 4.5 GPA, and it doesn't line up with the overall goal. It's what you spoke to. They're doing it because everyone else is doing it. And they never bother to take a step back and just be like, what's the point of this? Right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing you really spoke about too is when we focus on the product over focusing on the process, after a while, things go awry. All the research says focus on your process, and that's this growth mindset research as well. But, you were talking about just the product. You have to get that A, and everything else goes to the wayside, including your health.
Yeah. And I finally came to the conclusion that, I don't need straight A's to be a teacher. I'm not going to sit here and fall down to get straight C's and D's, but it's okay to get a B in a class if I tried my best. If I was still doing everything I could to work as hard as I could, if I got a B, that's fine. It's not going to haunt me for the rest of my life.
And thank you for saying that, because sometimes when you have this perfectionist conversation, where there's students, parents, teachers, whoever, they're like, we're saying don't try your best. That's not what we're saying. We're saying give it your all, focus on the process, and things will work out eventually. But you have to get up to an 8 or a 9 on your focus attention. But if you don't give your brain rest, you're just not going to remember anything.
Well, and that was what it really came down to, was that I learned that in high school, I wasn't an amazing test taker. So I knew that even if I studied as hard as I was going to, that I needed to work hard to get a good grade on a test, because that environment was hard for me. But I could focus more attention towards essay projects and stuff like that, where I knew that I could take my time. And I wasn't sitting in an environment where I had 45 minutes to answer as many multiple choice questions as I could and turn in my test, because that wasn't the end goal. I had a few teachers who realized that I knew much more than was coming through on my test, because when I did have that concussion, I took a few tests in a verbal scenario where my teachers asked me questions and I was just speaking with them. I got much higher grades on those tests than I did when they handed me a Scantron, and that was because the anxiety of a test was inhibiting me. Once I learned that, and I learned that I was going to try my best, and maybe my best was going to be a B, and that was fine, but my best on my essay was going to be an A because that was my strong suit, they even out. And I was still going to get, that high B or A in a class because I was playing to my strong suits.
Absolutely. Well, and again, actions and ambitions, right? Your end goal was to be a great educator. A great educator is a great communicator.
Yeah.
So you being amazing at Scantrons, that's not the goal here.
Exactly.
That's not a bad skill. That's a great skill in some fields. That's just not your skill. You finally eased off a little bit. You still worked hard, but you learned how to ease off. Then you came out from Chicago to CU Boulder. So I'm assuming you kind of beat this perfectionism thing, right?
No.
Of course not. Of course not. It always goes
no.
back to Hannah. What did that look like from having to transition with some anxiety out of state?
I had so much free time on my hand, I didn't know what to do. Because I went to such a high achieving high school, I came in with a lot of credits. And so there were a lot of freshman year classes that I didn't have to take. So I was not taking as many classes as my other friends freshman year. And I would have, hours in between my classes, and I could sleep in till noon if I wanted to. And then I fell into that, sort of mindset where I could sleep till noon and then go to my class and then do my homework later at night. Because I had so much time, I would just push things to the side. And then I would struggle because then I would be cramming at night to try and get my things done to these same standards that I had still set for myself, because I still wanted to achieve high, but I didn't know how to do it in a non-cutthroat environment.
This was more like me. It's like you don't do anything all day and then this anxiety wave hits, bam. Now I'm chugging Red Bulls in the library and I'm trying to knock out a week's worth of homework really quickly. What you just said, whether there's anxiety or not, is so spot on for so many freshmen, especially out-of-state freshmen. You go from a very structured household to it feels like nothing. And on paper, it should be so easy to do your homework, right? You have all this free time.
Yeah.
It's not the case.
No, because when I was in high school, even after I took the step back from all the AP classes, I was still, going to school all day and having practice at night. And I had, maybe an hour and a half window to get my homework done. So I was productive because I didn't have a choice. But then you go from that, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. schedule to nothing, to having maybe 3 classes a day that don't start until noon.
For me, that's just as anxiety producing as a full schedule. Like if I have nothing on my schedule on a work day, this is different from like a weekend, but on a work day, if there's nothing on my schedule, like I feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I just, I'm on my phone all day.
And that's what was happening to me. I was very rested. I slept really late every day, but then I was working on homework late at night, and then I couldn't go and do things with my friends because then I was like, well, I didn't do my homework today. So now I can't go out with my friends at night. I can't, go get dinner with my friends when they're going because I still have to finish my work.
It's the same trap, but opposite.
Yeah.
It's the same trap. So was this anxiety producing, having not a whole lot on your schedule?
Yeah. And it actually led to my official anxiety diagnosis my freshman year of college, where I was then so overwhelmed with like adjusting to a new schedule that I was having constant panic attacks, and I would go home from college a lot. And I didn't even live here. I would be flying home, once or twice a month because I was struggling so much with the adjustment. And I feel like that's something people don't really talk about freshman year, was that I was unhappy, and now I couldn't be happier, but I was unhappy.
Was it confusing to a lot of people? Because I could see them looking at your schedule and being like, how can you have anxiety? You have like 2 hours of something per day.
A lot of people were confused why I struggled to be away from home because I was an overnight camp kid. I spent my summers away from home anyways, but those summers were structured still. So I had never been away from home totally on my own with no structure. And it was quite honestly a slap in the face.
You handled it in a different way than I would have handled it, right? I would have just been out partying nonstop. And whenever you go from structure to unstructure, you've got to figure this thing out. And it can look a million different ways. How did you begin to figure this out?
I had to build my own structure. I had to set aside times, and I had to start planning in a different way. I had to plan to wake up, and even if I didn't have classes that day, I had to act like I did. So I started treating college like a 9 to 5. And I still do this, even though I have a much busier schedule right now. I woke up at 8:30 and I opened my computer and worked from 9 to 5 like it was a job, whether I was going to class or I was going to the library to study, or I was going to run, the errands that I had to pick up the textbooks that I needed, whatever. I did that from 9 to 5. And as soon as 5 o'clock came, I closed my job, my computer, like I was coming home from a job. And then I had my evenings for my friends.
I can see every single 18 to 22-year-old I know pushing back on what you just said.
Oh, I'm sure.
Did it make your life boring? Because I think everyone who pushes back, it's going to come to the same, conversation of, my life sounds terrible now that I have a 9 to 5. Did it make your life boring?
No, because I was still seeing my friends throughout the day. It made my life so much better because I was getting out of my dorm. And that's how I started to meet people. I was getting outside. Before I was, sleeping till noon and then just going to class, I was going from dorm to class, dorm to class, dorm to class. I wasn't meeting anybody outside of the small building I lived in. And so that's how I started to hear about things on campus and started to get involved in things on campus. And then I started adding things into my day, little by little. And that's what really...
And I know, personally speaking, and working with a lot of students in this situation, there's a different feeling going out with your friends, having everything done versus that voice in the back of your head. It's like, you didn't finish the paper. You didn't finish the paper. Just a very different feeling.
Yeah. And getting past that feeling and getting all of my work done made me so much more engaged with my friends and lifted everything off of my back when I would go out. Because I would work during the week and I would get all of my homework done so that on Thursday night or Friday night, whenever I went out with my friends and I knew that I was going to go out to do something, I had no other worries. And then I could spend, my Saturday going to Pearl Street with my friends and shopping, or, going out to dinner and doing stuff without the worries of coming back to homework.
But what you're talking about is unfortunately common.
Yeah.
Because you have some anxiety. You're going out of state, structure to unstructure, and then there's some kind of meltdown or some kind of significant challenge. Mm-hmm. If you were going to talk to a high school student or the parent of a high school student who's thinking about going out of state for college, or maybe just launching into a career out of state, what advice would you give them?
Give yourself time. When I got here and I was struggling so much, I thought I was never coming back to college. I thought that it wasn't for me. I needed to transfer somewhere closer to home and that I was never going to end up in Colorado like I wanted to. And that wasn't the case. Things fell into place, but it took time, and it took me finding the people that I wanted to be with. And it took some trial and error, and I joined clubs that I didn't like and I left them, and I joined clubs that I did like and I'm still in them. And that's where I met all of my friends. But you have to give yourself that sort of grace, that it's okay to not be perfectly happy at first. And it's that willingness to persevere through it and try different things and put yourself out there a little bit that is really uncomfortable, but really pays off.
It is so uncomfortable. And
it's so uncomfortable.
And we used to say, like, try to join 6 or 7 clubs if you're not an athlete or you're not in the band or something. But try to join 6 or 7 and realize that at least 4 are not going to be a fit for whatever reason. You just don't click with the people, you're not accepted. And dealing with that rejection is so hard. But then the opposite's also true, right? There's 2 clubs which are a phenomenal fit, and you're going to make lifelong friends in those clubs or organizations or whatever that is.
Yeah. And for me, that was reaching out to one person that I was in class with, but never really hung out with outside of class. And I reached out to her, and we've been best friends ever since, and we joined clubs together. It was taking that step to push some of those friendships past like class acquaintances towards more of an actual friendship. One text message that I sent to this girl freshman year asking if she wanted to come to a workout class with me after like a weekend break, that pushed us from class friends to lifelong best friends.
Absolutely. Well, and if it's uncomfortable, you're probably doing it right.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable for all of us, right?
Yeah.
It just feels so awkward. Like, hey, do you want to go to dinner or something?
Yeah,
it still feels uncomfortable to me, but that's okay.
Yeah. And the other thing is that being connected with your family is not like, that doesn't make you weird in college. And I thought that I got a lot of pushback from a lot of people being like, why do you talk to your mom so often? And when I was a freshman, I was like, maybe I shouldn't. But now as a senior who unapologetically calls her mom every single day, I can tell you that that saved me a lot in college. So having that support system, whether or not it's actually here, helps a lot. And staying connected with my family, even though they're in Chicago, makes it a lot easier to still be here because I still feel like I'm at home. And then you build that sort of school family where if I need something, I have these people that I can go to, but I also know that I can still pick up the phone and call my friends at home, or I can call my parents and have that sort of to fall back on.
You're making me feel guilty for not calling my mom, but that's okay. That's a different issue for a different day. The other thing you said that I think is the core piece of advice too is the structuring your day, because you moved through something quickly. I was going to a workout class. Like little things like that, like going to a workout class where you don't have to like get all this mental energy. You're just showing up and they're going to take you through it.
Yeah.
Or going to office hours, or, just booking a day where you're not using all this willpower. You're just structuring it. And then you have a ton of freedom on the back end.
Yeah. And that's what I do still to this day. On Sunday, I sit down and I say, these are the things that have to get done this week. And these are the times that I know that I have to be in class. And for me, these are the times that I know that I have to be teaching. And then I can take those other times and fill in the other stuff that I need to do. So then I can say, this is the time that I'm going to go and take, my clothes to the tailor or to the laundromat or wherever I need to go. And when I put those things in my schedule, it makes me hold myself more accountable for them. So then my other tasks don't build up. Yeah. And then I can say, okay, this is science homework time. This is English homework time, because I'm going to be more productive this day than the other day. So I don't get to Thursday night before my Friday class doing everything at once.
For many students, structure is what calms their anxiety. So much of anxiety is not knowing, like, when am I going to start this English assignment? I don't know. But if I have an office hour scheduled or a writing schedule, whatever that is, I know I'm going to start it there, and this anxiety kind of goes away.
Yeah.
You can overdo it, of course, but building in structure so you can have a lot of free time. Really, when you're out of state and you think there may be some anxiety, that's a great place to start.
Building in that structure, but also building in your friends. I learned that I'm the type of person that I can't do work in my house. I won't get anything done because I'll think of everything else that I could be doing. So building in time where I can say, hey, I haven't caught up with this person in this class. Let me reach out to them and see if they want to go do this homework assignment at, the coffee shop. So then I'm out of my house and I'm thinking about how I went to this coffee shop for the purpose of doing this assignment, then I'm going to do it. Rather than waking up and sitting in my kitchen that has dishes that I could be doing while I'm trying to do homework.
There's so many things to do around the house if we try to do that. To close on this, I heard something that I just loved. I think most people know, when you're working out, when you stress a muscle, you need to let it rest or it's going to grow back in order to grow back stronger. This stress plus rest equals growth model. Well, we're figuring out this is the exact same thing with the brain.
Of course.
What you're talking about with anxiety, you're focusing as hard as you can, and then you're pulling off with friends. And then that's how you've built this really enjoyable life, and overcome's always the wrong word, but you've started to make progress on this perfectionist thing.
Yeah.
Do you live by this stress plus rest equals growth model that I know we teach and other people do as well?
Yeah. I live by the weekends are my free time, and the weekends are when I'm going to, Friday night, I go to dinner with my friends every Friday night at the same time at the same place. That's the immediate release to the weekend. That's when I don't open my computer again until Sunday when I'm going to do my homework. And I put my backpack in the corner and I don't think about it because I know that I worked so hard this week that I deserve to connect with my friends. And while I might not have gotten to, go to dinner on a Tuesday night, I get to do and spend the whole Saturday with my friends. It's making those sort of decisions to have this sort of little by little throughout the week.
Yeah. The fact that you are giving yourself Saturday at a minimum, that's going to lead to more productivity next week because you probably had that fear of missing out by not constantly doing, but giving you a little space is going to lead to twice as much productivity the following week.
Exactly.
Lauren, thank you so much for being here. I know this is going to be so helpful for so many people to listen to.
Thank you.
It's always great to talk to people who are built so different than me. And I'm so happy that, you've gained so many insights and you're just going to be a great teacher because of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Executive Function for All podcast. If today's episode brought you any value, please rate us 5 stars and share it with someone who may benefit. And remember, every small step you take builds towards your success. For resources and guidance, visit untappedlearning.com. Keep growing, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.